They say the scariest monsters don't hide under your bed. They sign documents in the daylight and call themselves your neighbors. It started with a letter. I came home on a breezy Thursday afternoon to find a cream-colored envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no signature, just the HOA's logo printed neatly in the corner. My first thought, great, another notice about trash bins. But this one felt different. The paper was heavier, the font sharper. When I opened it, my stomach twisted. You are in violation of Section 9, Paragraph 3, Exterior Modifications without board approval. Immediate corrective action required. Exterior modifications? What modifications? I hadn't changed anything. My house looked exactly as it did when I bought it, except maybe the rose bush I planted near the mailbox. And that's when I realized they were talking about that. The HOA had decided that my rosebush, a simple splash of red and life in a neighborhood of beige conformity, was a violation, a threat to community uniformity. I laughed at first. How could a plant be a crime? But laughter turned to disbelief when I read the fine print. A $500 fine and 14 days to remove it or face legal action. Yes, legal action. Over a plant. That's when the first chill ran through me. Something about the way it was worded, formal, cold, almost smug, made me realize this wasn't about flowers, it was about power. And I was about to learn just how far that power reached. You ever get that gut feeling that you're about to be dragged into something way bigger than yourself? That's what this letter felt like, a quiet knock on the door before the storm. Little did I know, that storm had already started brewing at the last HOA meeting, and my name was the thunder. I decided to show up at the next HOA meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. The board sat behind a folding table like some kind of suburban tribunal. At the center sat Margaret Ellis, the HOA president. Gray hair, pastel sweater, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. She was the self-appointed queen of our quiet little kingdom, and everyone knew it. When my turn came to speak, I stood up, letter in hand. I'd like to know, I began, how a rosebush counts as an exterior modification. She didn't even look up. She just said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Miller. They exist for a reason." I pressed, trying to stay calm. "But it's just a bush. It's not harming anyone." She sighed. "The bylaws clearly state that all landscaping visible from the street must conform to community standards. You didn't get prior approval." The room fell silent. The sound of her words echoed like a gavel. It wasn't about the rosebush anymore. It was about obedience. And every eye in that room watched me, silently judging whether I would bend or break. So I asked the question that shifted everything. "Margaret, who approves these rules? Because I sure didn't vote for them." She smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "The board decides what's best for everyone." And there it was, the real truth. The HOA wasn't a democracy, it was a dictatorship hiding behind neighborhood civility. As I left, one of my neighbors, an older man named Richard, whispered, "Careful, they don't like people who ask questions." I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. 2 days later, I woke up to find a citation taped to my garage. This time, driveway oil stains, $200 fine. And when I tried to fight back, I discovered something far worse. The HOA had power the city didn't even question. You'd think the law would protect you, right? That if someone overstepped, you could call the police and they'd sort it out. Yeah, that's what I thought too. When the HOA started sending me fines weekly, each one more absurd than the last, I decided to file a complaint. I went down to the local code enforcement office with all my paperwork. The clerk glanced at it, shrugged, and said, "That's an HOA issue, sir. We don't get involved." I blinked. "But they're threatening to sue me for something that's not even illegal." He leaned forward, lowered his voice. "Sir, HOAs are private associations. They can set and enforce their own rules, as long as homeowners agreed when buying the property. That word hit me hard. Agreed. I hadn't agreed to tyranny, I'd agreed to community maintenance. But those pages of fine print in the purchase contract, they had signed away my rights without me realizing it. So, I called a lawyer. She explained it in plain English. Technically, the HOA's power comes from the covenants you signed. In some cases, they can even foreclose on your home if you don't pay fines. Wait, foreclose? Over a rosebush? That's when it clicked. The HOA wasn't a group of volunteers, it was a corporate machine backed by real legal authority. To test it, I called the local police one night after an HOA member trespassed onto my property to inspect my yard. When officers arrived, I showed them the security footage. You know what they said? If it's the HOA doing it, it's a civil matter. We can't intervene. I remember standing there in the cold, my hands shaking, realizing something horrifying. The police couldn't protect me. The law couldn't protect me. Because inside the gates of my neighborhood, the HOA was the law. You ever feel like you're living in a bad dream, but the HOA is the one holding the alarm clock? Yeah, welcome to suburbia. The more I fought back, the worse it got. My mailbox was vandalized, my guests started receiving parking tickets on private property, and then, just when I thought they couldn't go lower, someone filed a nuisance complaint about my house. Reason given? Suspicious behavior and hostility toward board authority. That's when fear turned into anger. I decided to dig deeper.
If you ever want to know how corrupt people operate, follow the paperwork. I started requesting HOA meeting minutes, budgets, and legal filings. They tried to deny me access, saying I needed to file a formal request. Fine, I filed it. Then I waited. A week later, I received a USB drive in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside were files labeled HOA Internal, Confidential. Whoever sent it, they wanted me to know something. I opened the first document. It was the HOA's Charter Amendment 12A, quietly passed a year ago with no homeowner vote. It granted the board authority to issue administrative enforcement actions, basically giving themselves police-like powers inside the neighborhood. They could issue fines, authorize property inspections, even restrict community access for non-compliant residents. They'd built their own private legal system. No oversight, no accountability. And it didn't stop there. I found emails between board members discussing compliance quotas. Quotas! As if homeowners were numbers to hit each month. One line chilled me most. If we maintain pressure, most homeowners settle quietly. Litigation risk minimal. They knew they were abusing power. They just didn't care. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, because if they had forged a system this deep, what else were they hiding? The next morning, I found something nailed to my front door. A red tag, bold black letters read, Final Notice, Non-Compliance. Only this time, it wasn't signed by the HOA. It was signed by the city. How did the HOA convince City Hall to join their crusade? That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about control. And someone in power wanted me gone. When I saw that red tag nailed to my door, something in me cracked. It wasn't the color or the threat. It was the signature. The seal belonged to the City Code Enforcement Division. The same office that had told me weeks earlier that they had nothing to do with HOA issues. Now, suddenly, they're enforcing HOA citations? I drove straight down to City Hall, tag in hand, heart pounding like a drum solo. The receptionist gave me that polite smile reserved for angry citizens. I said, I need to know why your department is enforcing private HOA rules. She frowned. Sir, if you received a joint notice, it means the HOA has a compliance partnership agreement with the city. Compliance what? I repeated. What does that even mean? She glanced at the screen, lowered her voice. It's part of a pilot program. Allows certain HOAs to refer violations directly to the city for enforcement. It's supposed to reduce complaints. Reduce complaints. Right, by silencing them. I asked to see the paperwork, but she said it was restricted. That word again, restricted. Everything about this felt wrong. So I went home and called my lawyer, Jennifer. She was calm, sharp, and didn't flinch easily. But when I told her about the tag and the city partnership, she paused for a long time. Finally, she said, "That's not normal. If they really have that agreement, they might be operating outside their legal scope." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Meaning," she said, "if we can prove collusion between a private entity and a government body to enforce non-statutory rules, they could be in violation of due process." I exhaled. Finally, something that sounded like hope. But that night, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. A blocked number. I answered, groggy. A voice whispered, "Stop digging into the partnership." Then the line went dead. I sat there, heart hammering, staring into the darkness of my living room, because for the first time I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood feud. It was a cover-up. Ever had that cold sweat that tells you you're being watched? Yeah, that feeling and I were about to become close friends. Over the next week, weird things started happening. First, a white utility truck began parking across my house. Always the same spot, always with tinted windows. The driver never got out, never moved, just sat there, engine running like he was waiting for something. Then came the drones, tiny black specks hovering over my backyard at odd hours. One night I shined a flashlight at it, boom, it zipped right away instantly. At this point, I started documenting everything, photos, videos, timestamps. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smart. I even tried to confront the man in the truck one morning. I walked up, camera rolling, and said, "Hey, you've been parked here for 3 days. Mind telling me who you work for?" He rolled up the window, drove off. But as he did, I caught the logo on his dashboard. Ellis Property Management. Margaret Ellis, the HOA president. It was her company. That's when fear turned to fury. I realized she wasn't just enforcing HOA rules, she was profiting from them. Every fine, every inspection, every approved vendor contract. It all ran through her management firm. This wasn't a community. It was a racket. Imagine paying monthly fees for the privilege of being bullied by your own neighbors. Sounds like a Black Mirror episode, right? Except this one doesn't end when you turn off the screen. I brought my evidence to Jennifer. She reviewed it, nodded slowly, and said, "We can file a civil suit, but you should be careful. These people know how to make lives miserable." "Too late for that," I said. "They already started." That night, I came home to find my water shut off. The utility company said they received notice of noncompliance from the HOA. I had proof of payment, but they didn't care. They said, "Talk to your HOA." The HOA had managed to cut off a city service. I wasn't living in a neighborhood anymore. I was living in occupied territory. And the more I resisted, the more dangerous it became. Sleep became impossible. Between the drones, the letters, and the truck, I felt like I was under siege in my own home. Every sound made me jump. Even my dog started growling at shadows. My neighbors stopped talking to me. Word spread that I was unstable, aggressive, a danger to the community. Classic smear tactics. Jennifer advised me to move out temporarily, but I refused. "If I leave, they win," I told her. But deep down, I knew I was cracking. One night, there was a knock at my door. Loud, urgent. I opened it to find Richard, the same neighbor who'd warned me months earlier. He looked pale, sweating. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, handing me a folder, "but they're planning something big." Inside were emails between the HOA board and a private security firm. The subject line? Resident Eviction Procedure. They were trying to remove me from my own property under a fabricated community safety clause. Basically, they wanted to frame me as a threat so they could legally force me out. I asked Richard how he got the emails. He hesitated. "My daughter works in Ellis's office. She saw your name on the file." I felt sick. This wasn't just a vendetta. It was a purge. Anyone who challenged the board was next. The next morning, my lawyer filed for a restraining order against the HOA, but before the paperwork could even process, the man in the truck came back. Except this time, he didn't stay parked. He followed me. Down the street, to the grocery store, back home. That night, I set up cameras around the house and waited. And what I caught on film changed everything. Because at 3:12 a.m., the man stepped out of his truck, walked to my driveway, and sprayed something on my garage door. The next morning, I went outside to find one word scrawled across it in red paint. Enough. After that night, I knew I was running out of time. I backed up all my evidence, stored it on multiple drives, and gave one to Jennifer. She was preparing to go public: press, social media, local news. If the HOA wanted a war, we'd give them one. But before we could act, the unthinkable happened. It was just past midnight when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's barbecue, but then the fire alarm screamed and I saw it, flames licking the side of my garage. I rushed outside barefoot, calling 911, shouting for help. Neighbors came out, some filming, others just watching in silence. The fire department arrived fast, but half the garage was already gone. The next morning, investigators ruled it as electrical malfunction. Except I didn't buy that. I reviewed my footage, and there it was, faint but undeniable. A shadowy figure near the fuse box, minutes before the fire started. I sent the clip to Jennifer. She called me immediately. "This isn't just harassment anymore," she said. "This is criminal." But when she tried to press charges, the local precinct brushed it off. Insufficient evidence, they said. The same officer even muttered under his breath, "You should have just followed the HOA rules." That was the moment I knew the system was gone. The HOA had wormed its way so deep into city politics, enforcement, even public opinion that truth didn't matter anymore. Ever heard the phrase, "death by paperwork"? Yeah, turns out it's real, except now it's accompanied by drones and arson. As I watched the ashes of my garage smolder, I made a decision. If the HOA wanted a fight, I'd give them one they'd never forget. Because the truth was bigger than my house. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied into silence. So I packed my things, grabbed my files, and left town for a while. Not to run, but to prepare. Because somewhere in those documents was one name, a connection that tied the HOA, the city, and the law firm together. And once I found out who it was, this whole empire would burn. I drove 3 hours north to a quiet motel off Highway 14, one of those places with flickering neon signs and a soda machine that still took quarters. It wasn't exactly a safe house, but at least here, no one knew my name. I spent the next few days combing through every file, email, and scanned document from the USB drive, and then I found it, buried in a folder labeled Community Growth Initiative. It wasn't just an HOA plan. It was a real estate pipeline. Margaret's management firm, Ellis Property Management, was partnering with Stratwell Developments, a multi-million-dollar company that specialized in acquiring undervalued properties. Their strategy? Force non-compliant owners into forfeiture, then buy their homes cheap. I was one of their targets. That realization hit me like a gut punch. They weren't enforcing rules. They were manufacturing violations to trigger forfeitures. It was a business model built on fear. I started calling every contact listed in the documents. Most ignored me. Some hung up. But then one name stood out. Evelyn Cross, a former HOA treasurer who'd resigned 2 years prior. When I called, she answered with a shaky voice. I was wondering when someone would find those files. I said, "You knew about this?" She said, "Of course I did. That's why I left. But leaving doesn't mean they let you go." Evelyn told me that after she resigned, her house was suddenly deemed unsafe by city inspection, condemned and seized. She'd lost everything. Then she said something that sent chills down my spine. They call it Project Uniformity, and it's bigger than your HOA. Way bigger. Before I could ask more, she whispered, "I monitor my calls. Don't contact me again." Then she hung up. You ever have one of those moments where you realize your neighborhood drama just turned into a Netflix-level conspiracy? Yeah, welcome to mine. That night, I stared at my evidence board, photos and strings everywhere, and realized something critical. This wasn't about one HOA flexing power. It was about the system that let them do it. And now that I had proof, I was going to expose every piece of it.
I reached out to a journalist I knew from college, Sarah Kane, now an investigative reporter for a local paper in the city. I sent her a summary of everything, the illegal partnership, the fake violations, even the fire. She called me within the hour. "If half of what you're saying is true, this could be massive." We met in a diner just outside town. She looked around nervously before sitting down. "Do you have hard evidence?" she asked. I slid her a flash drive across the table. More than enough. She scanned through the files on her laptop, eyes widening. This is coordinated fraud. These contracts are falsified." "Then let's go public," I said. "Expose them." She hesitated. "You don't understand. These people have influence. They advertise with our paper. They've got half the city council on their payroll. If I run this, it'll blow up everything." I leaned forward, then let it blow. Sarah promised to start verifying the documents. She said she'd reach out in a few days. But she never got the chance. 2 nights later, I got an email from an anonymous address. "You shouldn't have involved the press." Attached was a photo of Sarah's car, its windows smashed, tires slashed, and the word traitor spray-painted across the hood. She texted me soon after, shaken. "I know. I can't risk it. I'm sorry." I didn't blame her. I was scared too. But that only confirmed how deep this thing went. So I changed tactics. If the media couldn't help me, I'd go to the one place where corruption couldn't hide forever. The courtroom. Spoiler. Turns out even courtrooms aren't immune when HOAs have friends in the right places. My lawyer, Jennifer, filed a federal complaint against the HOA and the city partnership. We had evidence, emails, contracts, witness statements. It was airtight. Or so we thought. The court hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. The judge, a stern man named Harold Gibbons, had a reputation for fairness. But from the moment we entered the courtroom, something felt off. Margaret and her lawyer were already seated, chatting casually with the bailiff. When the judge walked in, he barely looked at us before saying, "Let's make this brief." Jennifer presented the evidence with precision, her voice steady. Then Margaret's lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, this entire case is a misunderstanding. The HOA acted within its legal rights per the covenants the plaintiff agreed to. We request immediate dismissal."
I expected debate, cross-examination, something. Instead, Judge Gibbons leaned back and said, "Motion granted. Case dismissed." Just like that. No review, no explanation. Jennifer stood frozen. "Your Honor, with respect, we have—" He slammed the gavel. "Case dismissed." I felt the floor drop beneath me. Outside, Jennifer whispered, "That wasn't normal. He didn't even look at the evidence." Later, I found out why. Through a contact at the clerk's office, I discovered Judge Gibbons' brother-in-law worked for, you guessed it, Stratwell Developments, the same corporation funding the HOA's expansion. The system wasn't broken. It was rigged. I remember standing outside the courthouse, watching Margaret walk past with that smug little smile. She leaned close and whispered, "Told you, Mr. Miller, rules are rules." I clenched my fists. For the first time in my life, I wanted revenge. Not for the rosebush, not for the house, but for the truth. And I was about to find it in the one place they thought no one would ever look. The next few days were chaos. Emails from fake accounts flooded my inbox. Strange cars started tailing me again. But then, out of nowhere, Richard showed up at my motel. He looked terrified. He said, "They're watching me now, too. I shouldn't be here, but you need to see this." He handed me a flash drive. "It's from Evelyn. She said, if anything happened to her, I should get this to you." When I plugged it in, there was one file, a 12-minute audio recording. It started with Margaret's voice, calm, cold. "Once Stratwell finalizes acquisition, make sure we issue non-compliance notices to the remaining 5 homeowners. Foreclosure process begins within 60 days. Another voice responded, male, unfamiliar. "And the city?" "Handled. The mayor's office signed the renewal last week. They won't interfere." My hands shook as I listened. This was the smoking gun, proof of collusion, extortion, and abuse of power. I sent the file to Jennifer, and within hours she was on her way to the state attorney general's office. Finally, justice was within reach. But that night, as I packed my things to leave for good, there was a knock at my door. Not gentle, heavy, measured. When I opened it, no one was there. Only an envelope slid under the door. Inside was a single photo. Me, standing at my motel window earlier that day, and beneath it, in neat handwriting, "You talk, you disappear." They knew where I was, and they were done warning me. It was past midnight when I decided I couldn't live in fear anymore. My house, once my sanctuary, had become a battlefield. The HOA had broken into my home office 2 nights ago. I found muddy boot prints by the back door and my files scattered across the floor. I installed a camera that same night, hidden behind a bookshelf. I wanted proof, cold, undeniable evidence. The next evening, a black SUV parked outside my house. 3 silhouettes stepped out, one of them unmistakably Linda. The other 2 were the HOA's private security officers, wearing black polos embroidered with the association's emblem. They walked straight to my door, knocked. Once, twice. I opened it slowly. Linda smiled. "We just wanted to make sure you're complying with the board's new mandate." I crossed my arms. "Is breaking and entering part of the HOA's job description now?" She didn't flinch. "You should be careful with accusations like that. You might find yourself in violation again." That's when I said it. I have you on camera. For a split second, her face drained of color. The men behind her shifted uneasily. Then she regained her composure. "I think we're done here," she muttered and turned away. That night, I uploaded everything: footage, documents, emails, to a private drive and forwarded copies to a local journalist who'd been investigating HOA corruption. But the moment I hit send, I had no idea what storm I was about to unleash. 2 days later, the story broke. Homeowner exposes HOA extortion ring. The headlines spread like wildfire. Within hours, the HOA's law firm released a statement claiming I was spreading malicious falsehoods and fabricating digital evidence. They demanded a retraction or they'd sue. But the tide had turned. Neighbors who once feared speaking up started sending me screenshots, illegal fines, doctored notices, even recorded phone calls of board members admitting to targeting certain families. The media pressure forced the city council to investigate. And that's when the truth surfaced. Turns out Linda's brother-in-law was the city inspector who approved every HOA enforcement order. He had been using the HOA's fake legal authority to intimidate residents into compliance. The investigation was heading toward a public hearing until the case mysteriously disappeared. No charges, no trial, no closure. The official reason? Insufficient evidence. I stared at that phrase for hours, trying to make sense of it. How could there be insufficient evidence when I had everything recorded? Then, one night, I received an anonymous message. "Stop digging. They own more than the HOA. They own the system." I tried to rebuild my life, sold my house, moved to another county. But even then, the paranoia followed me. Because deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about one corrupt HOA. It was about how power works when no one's watching. I started hearing from people all over the country. Families fined into foreclosure. Elderly couples losing homes over grass-length violations. Veterans threatened for flying their own flag. Each story had the same pattern. The HOA acted like it was the law, and the law let it. It's terrifying how easily rules can become weapons when there's no oversight. How something as small as a line in a community covenant can strip away your basic rights. And you might think, come on, that can't happen where I live. But that's exactly what they want you to believe. That sense of comfort is what keeps them powerful. The system isn't designed to protect the individual. It's designed to protect the framework. And by the time you realize that, you're already living under it. A year later, I received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page. "Thank you for exposing them. They're being watched now." No signature. No clue who sent it. But for the first time, I felt a strange peace. Maybe justice isn't always about courts or verdicts. Sometimes it's about dragging the darkness into the light so everyone can see what hides beneath the surface of community. I still drive by my old neighborhood sometimes. The gates look taller now, the signs stricter. But when I pass those homes, I don't feel fear anymore. I feel clarity. Because once you've seen how power truly works, you can never unsee it. And if you're listening to this thinking, that could never happen to me, just remember, all it takes is one rule, one neighbor, one board meeting to turn your home into a prison. If this story opened your eyes, don't stop here. Watch the next video on screen. The HOA president
who staged a break-in to frame a neighbor. It's another true story that proves one thing. In HOA neighborhoods, the real crime isn't always breaking the law. Sometimes it's writing it.